left over. After all, it's April 21st, the day after April 20th, 4/20. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another really live edition of Green Rush Live, the business of cannabis talk show that we do every Friday afternoon here on Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. So happy to bring in our pals from NORML, one in Michigan, the executive director, a regular contributor to We Talk News. His name is Rick Thompson. Hello, Rick Thompson.
Hi, Jimmy. I'm always happy to do this show. It's a big fun.
Appreciate it. And then, of course, we have Morgan Fox on the third Friday of every month, and he is back with us again from Washington, D.C. Hello, Morgan.
Hey, Jimmy. Sorry, it took me a day to find my bong.
That's by the way, I got to ask, is anybody left over from 420? You catch my drift? We don't call them hangovers, right? It's a leftover buzz when you wake up on April 21st. I don't know about you, but that was my story this morning.
Well, I'll tell you what, the unlicensed weed stores in my neighborhood were open at 9 a.m., which just shows you that cannabis consumers do have hustle. But also, I personally and most of the people that are involved in cannabis policy advocacy were running all day yesterday, all throughout the halls of Congress. And that'll beat you up.
I jumped out of bed and sang with the birds this morning. I don't know about you, but
wait. Sing with the birds now. Come on.
Sing with the birds. Yes, it's not very good. I chase the birds away is really what I do, but I hate to phrase it that way.
I get it. All right. Well, we're going to have a very interesting show today because what I did is ask all the people who regularly contribute to our We Talk News show to join us for a 15-minute segment to find out what went on in your state or their state during 420, and if these activities and festivities are actually extending through the weekend. And we'll hear from a few of our correspondents from coast to coast. But we're going to start off talking with Morgan because he was a very busy guy yesterday because there was some like a full court press on 420 on reform. Am I right, Morgan?
Absolutely. And just like speaking as somebody that has spent a lot of time dealing with journalists, I'm really glad that you organized this well in advance, because I cannot tell you how many emails I got from journalists who are not on the cannabis beat early yesterday morning saying, "Oh, we've got a 2:30 deadline. Let's get you on a segment." I mean, it is what it is. But yesterday was a really, really important day in DC for a number of reasons. It was really the culmination of a significant amount of legislation that has been introduced over the last couple of weeks. We had a couple of weeks ago the Veterans Equal Access Act be introduced by Representative Blumenauer and Representative Mast. And then we had the
Prepare Act?
The Prepare Act I'll talk about later. But
okay.
Honestly, the Prepare Act is symbolic and great, but we already know how to regulate cannabis. And I feel like passing that legislation and using political capital to do so is going to actually push the timeline a little bit farther. Not to mention the fact that the DOJ is in charge of convening that committee. And, we know that while the current DOJ has been relatively friendly to cannabis, I am not certain that the people that they would put on that committee would have a really solid idea about how to regulate cannabis at the federal level, absent the participation of advocates and people in the industry. But aside from that, we also saw the introduction of the Small Business Tax Equity Act, which would kill 280E for cannabis businesses. And then we saw the reintroduction of the HOPE Act, which would provide $20 million in federal funding over the course of 10 years to help facilitate state and local grant programs, basically, to help expedite expungement and otherwise conviction relief processes at the state level, where the vast majority of cannabis arrests have occurred. And then we saw the reintroduction in both chambers of the VA Medical Cannabis Safe Harbor Act, which basically does the same thing as the Equal Access Act, but it has a 5-year window. That's kind of a mixed bag because it's in both chambers and has broad bipartisan support in the House, Democrats and one independent in the Senate, but it's in both chambers and stands a chance of moving with Chuck Schumer at the helm. And then we expect to see a number of other bills be introduced in the very near future, not least of which will be safe banking in the Senate.
It just won't go away, safe banking, right?
It's not.
It's a necessary. They need, everybody still needs it. I was in New York City yesterday for 420. That too was an experience. I mean, there literally was a party on every corner in New York City, and there's a lot of corners in the Big Apple, as you know. Rick Thompson, I'm gonna guess you're ready to rock, and you can ask your fellow normal guy anything you want. Go ahead.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about those unlicensed shops in your neighborhood, Morgan. There's a huge segment of our industry, a huge segment of the cannabis purchasing population that derives their sourcing from the unregulated market. What do you see as far as a national strategy to try and migrate those people from their unregulated cannabis sources into the regulated market? Or is there just no federal strategy at this point on that?
Well, it's definitely a major concern at the federal level, but I think that a lot of people that are looking at this issue are looking at it in the wrong way. You look at the language of the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, it sets like a graded tax rate that goes up to 25% eventually. And that is basically what a lot of small businesses are already paying under 280E. And even if, a lot of businesses are paying up to like 70, 80, 90% federal taxes under 280E. But that sort of a tax rate is really not considering the fact that there is already a pervasive unregulated market. DC is a little bit of a unicorn when it comes to this issue because the district has allowed legal cannabis for adult use and legal home cultivation, but it has been prevented by Congress from actually regulating the adult use system. And very recently, the city council passed a measure, two measures actually, which are super important. The first was the Second Chance Act, which basically provides for automatic expungement of anybody that was convicted of behavior that is now legal under DC law, as well as some other things that are maybe not so legal under DC law, but that happened long enough in the past. And the second was an expansion of the existing medical program that basically opens the doors to all of these unlicensed regulators to become licensed and get their ducks in a row, be inspected, make sure that they're in line with all of the policies that the DC government has set in place. And because the Harris Rider, which has prevented DC from regulating adult use programs, doesn't touch medical, the fact that all of these organizations and all these businesses are being roped into the medical program, and the license caps have been removed, the barriers to entry have been significantly lowered, and there is an active urgency on the part of the city to bring all of these unregulated operators into the fold and make them regulated, hold them accountable, make sure that they are following all the rules, and doing so in a way that is not, financially burdensome for them. I think that we're going to see a complete sea change in what the DC cannabis scene looks like. And unfortunately, because of Congress, we can't necessarily just do this in a straightforward manner. We have to just expand the medical program to be as accessible as possible. Now, unfortunately, if you're just a random person who doesn't have a card in another city or another state, and you aren't a resident, then you might have some hoops to jump through in order to be able to legally buy cannabis from some of these newly licensed facilities. But the fact is that there's an active pursuit on the part of the city government to bring all of these gray market businesses that were created by congressional intransigence into the fold and make them regulated and give them some oversight and make sure that their products are tested, make sure that they are doing everything that they can to follow all the rules and to be good stewards of their neighborhoods. And honestly, I think that DC government is doing the absolute best they can in the face of congressional committee in particular that is trying to use DC as a bully pulpit to push their values that they can't necessarily get passed through Congress or in their own states on a district that they don't even really live in.
I got my start in the unregulated market too, from 2009 to 2012 with Big Daddies. We had a chain of 5 unregulated market dispensaries here in the state of Michigan, and a variety of different things ended up shutting us down. But there are quite a few different unregulated market guys in Michigan that were able to successfully make the transition from that world into the regulated marketplace and are now doing extremely well. Plus, some of the players, even if the businesses didn't survive, the knowledge base from the unregulated market was there to help seed the regulated market and really gave us a step up. Michigan's experiencing a huge increase right now with a 16% jump in sales in March over February. But Morgan, previously on an episode that we were on together, you'd mentioned that it would be very difficult to foresee positive cannabis law reform getting through the House of Representatives based on its current leadership structure. Have you gotten any optimism since that time? Are we happier or maybe thinking that we might get something good done this year?
Well, I want to go back to something you said a second ago. That 16% rise really represents sales that are not taking place in the unregulated market. So anytime we see that, that is generally a sign that consumers are moving towards the regulated market. And that largely happens when you remove barriers to entry to get into the market to be able to produce and provide cannabis. And we're seeing the exact same thing in DC. When it comes to the federal level, I still think that there is a significant appetite to be able to move at least incremental legislation across the finish line. Everybody's looking at safe banking, but there is a lot of bipartisan legislation in the House right now that is pushing for veterans access and protections, for expungement, for additional research, and this is just the beginning. I think we're going to see a lot more legislation coming across the board, especially in the House, and which is kind of surprising because it's a Republican-led House. And I think that really speaks to the strength and cohesiveness of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, which is bipartisan, and the folks that are chairing that are really pulling the strings and making sure that they can get bipartisan support in the House for pretty much any bill that they introduce. And it's going to move us a little bit farther down the road towards eventually ending prohibition. Cannabis prohibition or cannabis policy reform, rather, has always been an incremental task. We get people a little bit more comfortable with, moving an inch down the road. And then once they see that they don't get any political blowback from that, and that the things that were instituted by those laws were successful, then they're more comfortable moving a little bit farther down the road. And particularly in a Congress that is split camerally, as well as a very, very near split within both chambers, there's not going to be a lot of opportunity for anybody to pass really substantive legislation about anything. But cannabis policy reform is one of those areas where the majority of the public on both sides of the aisle supports this, and anybody that is ignoring that is going to face the consequences of that come November next year.
Yeah, let's see that happen. Hey, what's going on with the descheduling, rescheduling with the DOJ? There seems to be some scuttlebutt around that the Cole memo might actually be reinstated in some way, which would keep the feds away from the states. If they take cannabis off controlled, that Schedule 1, doesn't that open up the banks?
Descheduling would solve a lot of the problems that exist with federal prohibition. Things like banking, 280E, interstate commerce, et cetera. The problem is doing that blanket without any sort of a regulatory structure might create a whole lot of other problems. So we have to do it thoughtfully. But the bottom line is that I don't think that the DOJ is going to do that, because actually it's not just the DOJ, it's the DEA that holds final sway over the scheduling. And if Health and Human Services and Chairman Becerra or Director Becerra decides to suggest or recommend that cannabis be descheduled, that doesn't mean that the DEA has to listen to that. And we've actually seen this happen before multiple times over the last couple of decades, where the DEA got recommendations from both their own administrative law judges, from people within the DEA structure, from people in the larger DEA, from people at Health and Human Services, to change the schedule of cannabis. And they have flat out ignored it. And they've actually gone to court to solidify their right to do so. And courts, of course, ruled in favor of the DEA. So the bottom line is whether or not the DEA is going to listen to any sort of recommendations from HHS and the other organizations that are currently reviewing cannabis's schedule on the Controlled Substances Act. Now, I'm also concerned that that recommendation might come out as something like rescheduling, moving it down to 2 or 3 or 4. None of these would actually remove the state-federal conflict. So honestly, this is going to have to come from Congress. But the fact that they're actually reviewing it and that there is a significant scientific review going on about the harms and potential benefits of cannabis and about its effects on society are actually going on is very heartening to me. It's very rare to have that being done in a positive direction with the green light stamp of the president. But I don't think that it's going to actually result in anything concrete. That being said, symbolically, as well as the fact that the administrators and high-level agency personnel in these different departments are going to be looking at this through a different lens, is incredibly important when we're looking at long-term change.
What about Schedule 6? There's a new move to create a brand new schedule added to the list of controlled substances, a 6, which would be the absolute lowest level of threshold. What advantages would that offer, but also what restrictions would that still contain?
To tell you the truth, I've seen some of those sales pitches, and I honestly think that they're being pushed by groups like Project SAM as well as profiteers who are trying to get extra lobbying dollars for whatever. It's not even something that we should be considering. And to tell you the truth, we should not accept anything other than descheduling. There's currently a bill in the House right now, introduced by Representative Greg Steube from Florida, who has really actually been pretty solid on this issue in the past. And unfortunately, he's still recuperating from a massive fall off of a ladder early this year. But he introduced a bill called the Marijuana 1 to 3 Act, which would automatically reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And NORML is opposing that bill because Schedule 3, Schedule 4, Schedule 5, cannabis does not belong on the schedule of controlled substances. And no matter what the schedule is, it will create additional barriers to instituting sensible cannabis policy at both the federal and state level, and will not actually remove the conflict between those two sets of laws.
Good for you.
Hey, one more thing I got to ask you about the race to 22. Right now, you've got 21 adult use legal states in the United States, and a governor of a real teeny weeny little state is sitting there with the bill that's been passed twice on his desk. And I thought that by now the power of the veto of the governor would have passed even if he didn't sign it. And I'm talking about the state of Delaware. I'm sure you understand what's going on there, Morgan. Is this guy, this is Governor John Carney, I'm pretty sure is his name. At this point, isn't it supposed to be law according to that state's constitution? In other words, he didn't veto it, but he ignored it. And because both the House and the Senate have passed it, it's supposed to be law, isn't it?
Well, this is actually a pretty complex issue. There's 2 bills. The first one legalizes cannabis possession and I believe minor home cultivation. And the second bill actually sets up a regulatory structure. The governor has until Saturday to either veto or approve or allow to pass without a signature the first bill on Saturday.
Okay.
And then the regulatory bill he has until the middle of next week. Now, Governor Carney has previously vetoed these bills, and we thought we had a veto-proof majority, and it turned out when he vetoed it, we didn't. Now, I tend to think that he is going to allow the simple possession law to go into effect on Saturday without his signature.
Yep.
I don't know what he's going to do about the regulatory bill, and it's entirely possible that he will see which way the wind is blowing. He's been making a lot of statements on kind of like all sides that are pretty vague. He says that this is where the direction of the state is going, so I shouldn't interfere. But then he's also like raising tons of concerns about it. So it's difficult to tell exactly what he's going to do about the regulatory bill. If he decides to veto it, there is a veto-proof majority that approved it. But that doesn't mean that in the interim, he hasn't pulled some strings and pulled some of the votes to not actually override his veto.
Just to let you know, Delaware Online is reporting that Governor Carney has allowed those two bills to become law without his signature. So that was updated 41 minutes ago. So that's
Whoa!
great news for all of us.
All right.
Let's celebrate, right? That's a great, we have a 22nd state now then.
Well, let's slow our rolls here. Let's make sure that we verify and confirm, but that's still pretty great. And also, I mean, I don't want to say necessarily that this will influence the president, but I hope that it will at least nudge him in the right direction if he can see legal adult use cannabis stores, when he's going on vacation or, going back home. So,
Right.
Fingers crossed. Let's confirm this and see what's going on, and then we'll go from there.
That's why I love doing live news. Rick Thompson breaks that story. I freaking love it, man. I love it. Hey, Morgan, we love you too. And we appreciate your regular appearances on this show. You're welcome anytime, of course. And I'm now trying to figure out how the hell I get down to DC for lobby days. There's about 3 different conflicts on my schedule right now already. But I really want to come down there anyway, because I want to see my brother and my great nieces and nephews that are down there. Anyway,
Jimmy, you come down anytime and I'll lobby with you.
Oh, now we're talking. That I like that idea for sure. And there's another guy from the NCIA who's dying, I think, to hang out with me. You know who I'm talking about. Michael's invited me down a million times. So maybe we'll see that happen. But Morgan, again, thank you so much. We got a little bit of a late start today. Apologies for that. We're a little bit post our 4:20, but after all, it's 4:21 and we're on leftover time. Anyway, we're going to continue with more of our We Talk News staff as we go coast to coast and find out what every state did on 420 as Green Rush Live continues after this. Don't go away.
Safetiva Labs in Westfield is fast becoming the #1 testing lab for cannabis in Western Massachusetts. Safetiva understands the importance for accurate on-time test results for your product. That's why their current compliance panel turnaround time is less than 2 days. That's Safetiva Labs in Westfield. For more information, go to safetiva.com.